Carbon tax to be removed. Is an election near? Mark Carney meets with Emmanuel Macron in France, and Carney still won't disclose his assets. All that and more on The Really Big Show. I'm Jim Check with Kelowna Now. On the phone with me, Ian Burns, all the way in Ottawa. Beautiful day here in the Okanagan. I was in Calgary this past weekend, minus 15 and snowing, and drove home almost in a blizzard. How was it looking in Ottawa?
Sort of in between Kelowna and Calgary by the sounds of it. It's about 1 or 2 degrees and it's cloudy and it doesn't really look very nice, to be honest.
Yeah, I left Calgary yesterday at 5 in the morning, and it was like minus 15, cold and snowing, and it was like a not an enjoyable drive through the mountain pass there, through the Rogers Pass. Definitely not fun. Went through a jug of washer fluid. Um, and then you drive into the Okanagan, and it's like this, beautiful. It's like spring. It's like you just flew into Hawaii or something. Well, there you go. We got lots to get on with here today. And then we're covering this off days since the government's been prorogued. We're at 70 days now since we've had Parliament sit. It's almost like a summer break for all the MPs.
Well, I believe they hadn't even sat anywhere, had they? Because they'd already been off for Christmas.
Yeah,
So
that's
it's
right.
probably actually longer than that.
I'm sure they're still getting their checks. Um, and then this is a Holly Doan's Blacklock story. It says election near as gas cut expected to be 18 cents at the pump. That's what most people should see, an 18-cent cut. And I guess we're expecting that here at the end of the month. We should see that.
That's what it says in the order in council, yeah, that Carney, for some reason, decided to sign as though he were signing a presidential executive order in the Oval Office. I'm not really sure why he decided to do it that
They've
way,
been
because
watching
that's not
Trump.
how our system works.
Yeah, they've been watching Trump do that with the black Sharpie, and they figure they jump in on it, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's like a hell of a sort of visual, isn't it? As usual with Donald Trump, he knows exactly how to sort of present the image. He's great at visuals as well as like catchphrases and things like that. And I think probably, we happen to know anyway that Kanye is surrounded by quite a lot of kids. We know who some of them are with links to Kelowna. They're not like seasoned, Canadian political figures, a lot of them. They're just young people who have absolutely no idea what they're doing. So they've grown up in this environment of Donald Trump. Donald Trump's probably been around on the political scene for most of their lives. So they can't avoid the impression that Trump has made and continues to make. So I think probably they've been kind of sucked into that whirlpool of Trumpism, even though they no doubt despise him.
Newly appointed Transport Minister Chrystia Freeland, longtime champion of the carbon tax, said it could not continue. Certainly, this is her quote, certainly what I heard was this is not a policy that works for Canadians. It took them quite a while to hear that, I guess. It's just a question of democracy, said Freeland. It's a question of not being arrogant and telling people what's good for them. Just wonder why that wasn't said for quite a while when people were screaming that it was hurting the economy. The cabinet order averts a 19% scheduled tax hike that was supposed to take effect April 1, and it will repeal about 18 cents a liter, 21 cents for diesel, 21 cents for aviation fuel, and 12 cents a liter for propane, and 15 cents per cubic meter of natural gas. And that's the thing, that carbon tax was on home heating and a bunch of different things. And on diesel, it was really punishing. And if you think about it, diesel is the only thing that we can use for semis that drive across the second largest nation in Canada, or sorry, in the world, in Canada. Trains burn diesel. They don't have any alternatives that I know of. Do you know of any alternatives to diesel for trains
Well, there are electrified trains as well.
in Canada?
Not in Canada, no. Actually, maybe some very small bits of line, but yeah, in general, I think they do use diesel.
There you go. So there you go. So and then trucks, trains, and tractors all burn diesel here in Canada for the most part, and 21 cents a liter. A compounding tax is going to be gone here right away. And I know there's a lot of people saying, will they actually lower the price at the pumps? Well, we shall see, right?
Yeah, I mean the pressure will be on big time, but like we all know, don't we, that they take their time coming down, but they're very quick to put it up. I would expect that they will
Just like the
come
interest
down.
rates, just like the interest rates in Canada, they take the elevator up and then the slow staircase down.
Indeed, but I just have to go back. So I mean, we're so hardened, aren't we? We've been beaten up metaphorically so much as Canadian citizens, I think, by the Liberal government in many ways, at least sort of rhetorically beaten up. I just find it so astonishing that Chrystia Freeland has said those words. It's a question of not being arrogant and telling people what is good for them. That I cannot believe that she uttered that sentence. It just I really think we almost have to like just look at that and just think about what it is she's saying there. Does this woman not recall the last 10 years when she was in a government that was repeatedly accused of being arrogant and refused to back down on so many things, the carbon tax chief among them?
I think the one that I remember very vividly was where she said that she spoke with her dad and said that, why do people even need a car? And people should just get rid of that feeling that they need a car. And then we talked about this before, that she had a chauffeur-driven limousine provided by the Canadian government. She lives in a very expensive condo in Ottawa, and has most of her travel paid for. Whereas most Canadians, well, a lot of Canadians live in like smaller rural places where they don't have much choice even to get to the grocery store, or get your kids to hockey or whatever, or kids to daycare, other than to drive a car.
And even in big cities as well, where you don't have a light rail system, you might have buses, but very rarely will they go directly to like downtown or whatever your destination that you want. Usually it's like two or three changes. It's like it's not really feasible, even in some sort of big name cities.
Yeah, Christy Freeland should maybe go back in time and talk to her former self, because yeah, she seems a bit tone deaf on that.
Well, it's just in general, it's kind of it just amuses me. I mean, coming from the sort of British context as I do, it's interesting to see that the Liberal Party, they must take their they must learn their lessons from the Conservative Party in Britain, which is sort of nominally right wing, but it isn't really. It's much more of a sort of left wing Liberal Party. But the Conservative Party in England, they will argue for something, or they'll actually do things in government for years and years and years, be attacked for it, not change their policy, and then either be out of power or have a new leader or something, like as has happened with the Liberals, and then they'll pretend that they were against it all along. And it's kind of they just they're just a vehicle for winning power. Like they don't have any principles at all. It's just all about how can we seize and hold power, basically. Maybe seize is the wrong word. How can we obtain and hold power? And I feel like the Liberals, they want to be like the Conservatives. And I think maybe it's like this attitude that the Liberals are like the natural party of rule. Like they have like a God-given right to rule Canada. I feel like that's kind of the attitude, and that's certainly what it's like in England with the Conservatives. But it's just the lack of self-awareness. To talk
Yeah,
about let's not be arrogant. That is like the number one criticism of the Liberal government of the last 10 years, and they're pretending like it's all changed now.
one of the things that I've noticed, that it doesn't look like Pierre Poilievre is taking a victory lap over these axing the tax, as he called it. And they're getting rid of the tax, and instead the Liberals have even flipped it on him and said that Poilievre has nothing to campaign anymore now that the tax is gone.
Well, he certainly, he's facing a lot of criticism from his own side and from the right for lackluster campaigning over the last sort of year, I would say, or at least the last 6 months. But he's still just this morning, just now, I watched a press conference where he's saying he wants to get rid of the whole tax, not just on consumers, and that's an important distinction. But I'm not sure. They talk about this, whether ideas can cut through. They use that term as in like, will the average voter actually understand what that means or care about what that means? I'm not sure that's true, but I mean, he certainly does make a good point, because if you remove it from the consumer but leave it on industry or even increase it on industry, then it is quite obviously going to trickle down, and the
Yeah.
consumer will ultimately pay for it.
Yeah, I think that those Mark Carney had that interview there where he said, I think it was the CTV News, where he said, "Well, we're just going to put it on steel," and like, who buys steel? Like, when's the last? I think his quote was actually, "When's the last time you bought steel?"
Yeah, I mean that was a very unwise remark, I feel. That was probably got to be top five unwise remarks for Mark Carney in the last few weeks, next to fentanyl is a crisis in America, but it's a challenge in Canada. We sell all the semiconductors to the US. That was the stupidest one. And then trying to pretend like high steel prices won't have an effect on people's lives, basically. That's just unforgivably stupid, really, isn't it?
And then there seems to be more pressure, even from some of the mainstream media, heating up on this because the Prime Minister, Carney, won't discuss his wealth. He won't come clean, he won't disclose, and it's getting a lot more attention here. He's saying now it's all in a blind trust. He won't disclose his stocks, other assets that him and his wife hold with corporations on 2 continents, including federal contractors. And he told the reporters when they asked him, just like, I find it odd that anyone asked that question. I would like to reassure you the assets I have earned through employment, employment income, employment as a public servant, employment in the private sector. And, he just kind of talks in circles sometimes. What is the value of assets? Where do they come from? Asked the reporter. How can Canadians know there's no conflict of interest? A bunch of other questions. And he's just, that's an odd question, an odd way of framing it. So he just won't answer the question. It seems odd that he won't answer that question. And I think the more you don't answer it, the more people are going to ask it.
Yeah, it's the Streisand effect, isn't it? They call that, where you try and sort of hide something away, and it just ends up attracting more attention to it. But I mean, obviously, it isn't just he might be under the impression, or he might try and sort of get the idea out there that this is just like almost like jealousy, where it's like, oh, it's a rich guy who wants to be prime minister, and they're trying to kind of like they're trying to snipe at him just for his own wealth. But that's not what this is about. I think you have to look at it in the context of the trade war with the United States. That's what it's really about. The question is, I think underneath it all, the question is like how much of your wealth derives from and, is stored in the United States. Like, I would be very surprised if he didn't keep quite a lot of his money in the US stock market, for example. And it's just people are going to want to know that because we're now basically in this state of animosity with the United States. So it is going to want to be, people are going to want that information.
Well, his first foreign trip abroad, he's headed to France, and he met with Emmanuel Macron today. And then and he's trying to strengthen relationships with the European nations, and said that Canada is the most European of non-European countries. I'm not sure what that means.
Well, what's funny is the last quote you read out there from Carney was him saying it's an odd way of framing something. I would say that's a very odd way of framing something,
Yeah,
isn't
it's
it?
just
I
so
mean,
weird. Like,
what's he on about there?
I'm not sure what that is supposed to mean. So,
I think he's trying to say we're sort of liberal lefties, like the good old Europeans, and we're not like the Americans who are, raging fascists or something like that. I think it's an attempt to make a distinction between the politics of the US and Canada, but not in a very sophisticated or subtle fashion, I would argue.
I mean, he does have experience with the Europeans for sure because he was the Bank of England governor. So he's been in a lot of meetings with all these players over there too. So he's familiar with these people. It's not like he doesn't know any of them.
Yeah, he he seems to have quite a sort of chummy relationship with Macron, but Macron is kind of, even though his star faded quite a long time ago, but he's still kind of like the preeminent centrist, really, isn't he? Or liberal. I mean, he's not really a centrist. I think that's a misnomer, but he's like the preeminent liberal on earth now, isn't he? Really. So I think he's almost like going to pay homage to the king of liberalism.
Yeah, Macron with the handshake always, right? Him and Trump always jostle for who gets their hand on top of who, right? You can see that Macron is definitely taken over in that spot there. That Trump and Macron handshake have been played out over and over in the media. And obviously Mark Carney is unaware of it because he's allowed Macron to win this one.
I still think the funniest one of all is when Trudeau like yanked Trump's hand. I don't know what he was thinking and doing that. And he put like his big aggressive, his angry face on when he did it.
He summoned all his superpowers, I guess. There you go. And then Carney says he also wants to speak with President Trump as soon as possible.
Well, he's kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth here, isn't he? Because to go as the Prime Minister of Canada, to get on a plane and go over an ocean, fly thousands of miles to speak with a couple of middleweight powers, the British and the French, that is obviously like a massive snub and a gesture, isn't it? It's a snub of the United States. It's almost like saying, because they may, this is how they do business in politics. I find it so sad. I find it so pathetic. But they do things like this, don't they? They like send signals, and it's all about kind of like reading the entrails of the sort of the actions. And he's gone over there as a snub of Trump, and he's not. I mean, he's obviously said things about him as well that aren't particularly nice or favorable. But then, on the other hand, he dispatches his ambassador to the US here to go on Fox News and say, "Oh no, he really respects Donald Trump's plan and he really wants to speak with him as soon as possible." But obviously, that's mixed signals to say the least. I'd say from Carney.
I guess maybe he's hoping to put some kind of deal in his pocket that he could use for leverage against the Americans and say, "We have this deal with the Europeans if you don't want to deal with us." And maybe that is a good, smart move. We'll see what kind of deal he can make with France or the UK. But I don't. It doesn't look like they would sell out the Americans very easily either.
No, but they'd also it's Carney is unlikely to want to clear away the main obstacle to trade between Canada and the UK and Canada and Europe, which is the dairy sector. That's why, as we've said many times, that's why there is no UK-Canada free trade deal, because the British, obviously, as many people know, produce the world's finest cheese, and they want to sell that into whenever they do trade deals, they want to sell their cheese and they want to sell their dairy products. But Canada was, as is the case with the US, they wanted to have quotas and all kinds of tariffs and things, and that killed the deal. And that's also why the free trade deal with the EU, which is a bit more complicated because it's still actually kind of in effect now, but it's the reason that it hasn't been officially signed off on. And one of the main countries that refused to sign is France. And the reason is again because the French make some cheese that they think is of high quality that I would dispute, such as brie, and they want to sell that to Canada, and Canada's like, no, we want to protect the dairy industry. So it's kind of, I mean, that's the obstacle. And Carney's going to have to, if he really wants to get like things, something in his pocket, as you say, like actual consequence, then he's gonna have to sell out the dairy industry, which I very much doubt that he's going to do on the eve of an election.
Yeah, and on Pierre Poilievre pledges to completely repeal the carbon tax and expand eligibility for clean tech tax credits. So, because the Liberals are just really talking about putting it to zero, not actually getting rid of it. So it's kind of still sitting there on the books. But Poilievre says he'll completely axe the carbon tax and then also, expand eligibility for clean technology credits as a way of reducing CO2. So, he's been long accused of having no plan for climate change and for reducing CO2. And sounds like he's coming out with a plan as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how wise it is for him now to carry around as a prop the a printed off copy of the carbon tax law, because that's what he does now, and he waves it around at the podium as if to say, this law is still in effect, because obviously it is, because you need Parliament to come back to, if you really want to get rid of that law or change it significantly, Parliament has to do that. So he's trying to make that point. I mean, I don't really know if anyone, again, like I don't know if that's cutting through. I don't know if people actually really understand what that means. I mean, especially when Carney did that signing video, I feel like people now feel like, and obviously the press is completely obliged, and the press are like RIP carbon tax and all the rest of it, even though it is still there. The law's still on the books. It's just basically been suspended, really, hasn't it? And then he would have to put legislation through to really change it. But yeah, I mean, one good point that he did make, I think, or an interesting point anyway, he said, and this is clearly going to be one of his new catchphrases. He sort of said that producing steel or aluminium or whatever in Canada is something like 12 times less, um, damaging to the environment, or releases 12 times less emissions than in India or China or somewhere like that. And I mean, that is so obvious, isn't it? And we all kind of know that. That's kind of like a fundamental flaw in the deindustrialization strategy in the West. which is now known as net zero. I mean, it's an obvious flaw that in places like Canada and also Europe, it's true in Europe and even the US, they have much more efficient systems. You know, their industries are a lot more efficient because they have all these regulations attached to them where they have to use like the cleanest possible, version of gas or whatever it is or coal. Whereas in India and China, obviously they couldn't give two hoots about that. They just want economic growth and power and prestige and to improve the quality of life of their people. They don't care about that stuff.
Yeah, let's move on to the economy here. The OECD group of advanced economies has warned in the latest forecast that Trump's tariffs will really hurt Canada, and Canada projected to be at a very low growth rate, less than a percent there at 0.07%.
Yeah, and I mean that puts a bit of a dent in Mark Carney's promise to make Canada the fastest growing economy in the G7 over the next couple of years. I mean, I don't know what plan he has up his sleeves. He's going to have to explain what it is because that doesn't look good, does it? When even Japan, I mean, bear in mind, Japan is literally a dying country. They lose more people every year than they than are born. It's increasingly a country of old people wearing diapers. Like they've run out of young workers, basically. The Japanese economy has been in a stagnant um, state now for like 30 years, but still Japan is going to grow more than Canada. I mean, that is a hell of an indictment, isn't it?
And then we got another chart here to show you what the projections are for 25 and 26 too, right? And it doesn't look good for Canada going forward. It looks pretty weak in general, right? Canada's still under the percent growth for the next couple of years. Um, Not good. And we have
And
one more
it's
chart.
like,
Yeah, go
if you
ahead.
just look at those countries there, it's obviously possible to grow your economy because look at Spain. Spain doesn't really have there's no reason that Spain should grow faster than Canada on paper, you know? I mean,
No.
but if Spain can do it, if even Italy can grow faster than Canada, and the British can't even turn on their heaters at night because it's too expensive. They just sit there with like five blankets on, but they can figure out a way to grow their economy. I mean, what? There's a very deep problem in the Canadian economy.
Even the Russians in the wartime, they're doing better than the Canadians in their economy. We got one last chart to show you, and this really kind of like illustrates Canada versus some of the other nations, and this is the one that we talk about all the time. Growth-based GDP per capita over the last 10 years, and I think Paulie, I was starting to talk about the lost decade, and I think a lot of people have talked about the lost decade. And you look at the growth rate there for the United States and the red bar on the bottom there versus Canada. Like, I mean, it's abysmal. Like, that has been one of the biggest things that we've talked about this over and over and over again. Real GDP per capita in the last 10 years. And a lot of that having to do with our immigration policies too. We're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes, I guess. But
Yeah, well, that's the next one, and JD Vance having a go. But that is in a sense really the answer because it's kind of GDP per capita is literally just the GDP divided by the population. And obviously, when you add massive amounts of people on low wages and or students and all the rest of it, like immigrants, when you add them to your economy, that isn't going to raise the GDP very much, but it will raise the sort of denominator. Like there'll be less to go around, and that is in effect what's happened. But obviously, that doesn't capture everything. That fails to capture like housing and sort of like stresses on the infrastructure that have come as a consequence. But we were told, I mean, the point really to be made here is that we were told, not just in Canada, but this is everywhere, this is all over the Western world. We were told that it was necessary to bring in really just as many people as possible from anywhere in the world, as fast as possible, like right now, get them in. And that will increase the wealth for everyone. We'll be a much wealthier country. But that doesn't really look to be reality, does it? I mean, again, there's Japan. Japan takes in, you know, relatively very few immigrants, and it has considerably higher GDP per capita growth than Canada. So how does that work?
yeah, that disparity gap between Canada and the United States is just unbelievable. We've shown that chart many a time, and it's the last 10 years, it's really kind of just like really widened, right? And we're seeing that now too. Like even Premier Eby's talking about how investment people are don't want to invest in Canada right now, and they're fleeing to the United States where there's less regulation and lower taxation, and things can get done a lot faster.
Yeah, well, they hate uncertainty, don't they, businesses? They hate uncertainty and they certainly hate unnecessary expenses, which they would look upon, regulations and taxes as that they would say that that would represent unnecessary expenses. So it isn't a surprise that they would give Canada a miss. Although Canada, in fairness, has been a beneficiary of quite a lot of foreign investment, but a lot of it is in real estate, which is just a way to hide your money, basically, isn't it? It's a way to take your money out of a dodgy sort of regime like China and put it somewhere safer, like Vancouver.
This is a really important chart for people. Really take a close look at this. This is 10 years. You really have to look at this chart. And this means Canadians as a whole are getting less wealthy over time, less prosperous. And it's not a good looking chart. And then businesses look at this too when they're looking to invest capital. Where would you go? If you looked at this chart and you had investment capital to go somewhere and you looked at this chart, where would you go?
Probably Denmark, to be honest, looking at it there.
There you go. Canada would definitely be one of the lower polls. And then JD Vance, you put this one in here. JD Vance, I'll let you go on this one.
Well, this is connected very much. I mean, we should probably say that he's the thing that he's quoting there, it's a quote tweet as they go. I don't know what they call it now, actually, with it being X, but he's pointing to something in the Financial Times newspaper, which is an opinion column titled "Unlocking Canada's Superpower Potential," and it's all about what Canada could do to be better off, and like minerals and all the rest of it. JD Vance has presumably read this, and then he's pointed out one of the graphs in there, which is about productivity gains in Canada. We all know that by now, don't we? The productivity is an absolute catastrophe in Canada. It's just not growing. In some cases, it's actually declining. And this guy who wrote the article, well, I don't think it's the guy that wrote the article, actually, somebody that read the article and is referencing it, says despite Canada's massive population boom, it hasn't led to productivity gains. And that, even Justin Trudeau himself, as I always point out, he said that a couple of years ago, didn't he? Where he said it just hasn't worked. His own immigration policies had not worked. And JD Vance, he's like, he's basically trying to be like the intellectual godfather of the MAGA movement, isn't he? I think that's kind of his position in the White House. He's told the Germans just a couple of days ago in an interview, I think it was directed mainly at the Germans, but he said, if you keep inviting people on low wages from parts of the world that aren't sympathetic to Western civilization, basically your country is going to die and your economy won't, will die with it. And I think now he's read this story about Canada and he's also directing that attitude to Canada, which is I just think that's quite interesting, really. It's another attack line from the Americans, but this one is a little bit more reality based, I would say.
And you talked about real estate and saying that's where a lot of Canadian wealth is, and a lot of people moving money into Canada for real estate. But if we look at this chart here from CREA, the Canadian Real Estate Association, Canadian home sales fell sharply from January to February as home buyers remained on the sidelines for the first full month with that ongoing trade war in the U.S. You can see it drop off there. Sales activity recorded over Canadian MLS dropped 9.8% month over month, marking the lowest level since November 23 and the largest month over month decline since May of 22.
Yeah, well, it's uncertainty, I would say, isn't it? That's what the analysts seem to be suggesting that's the case as well, that they're very worried about the future of the economy, and a lot of that is down to the trade relationship with the US.
And one of the things that Trudeau's Liberals said, it's almost the same group of people, said they were going to do 650,000 home starts a year to, build into the amount of homes that Canada needs. But we also seen a sharp decline in home starts here from January to February. So not looking good in the housing market.
I mean, when they made that promise, all like within a few days almost, a lot of the big banks, gave their verdict, and they just said like, not only is this politically unlikely, but it's also possibly um, not even not even something that could be physically achieved. Like it's not even within the realms of possibility because there aren't enough workers to do that, and it literally just wouldn't be possible to do.
Yeah, and that's why I guess the last, I think it was Mark Miller, his immigration thing. They were going to fast track construction immigrants, but he's out now as well.
But also, I mean, that the numbers there aren't exactly huge. If you think, that is such an enormous undertaking, that isn't it? 600, like in the 600s,
Yeah.
600,000s, I should say. That's just like, I mean, the pharaoh would have a hard time doing that kind of thing. Never mind a country like Canada. It's just not really realistic, I don't think.
Again, let's switch focus to British Columbia. Bad start to the week with two more BC interior emergency rooms forced to close.
Yep, 100 Mile House and Lillooet again. They're often in the they're often unlucky in this regard. But it's not a good start, especially when we were told, weren't we, by the people who are kind of plugged into this, like the mayor of Merritt, I believe, was one of the people that told us this, that the real like bad patch is expected to be the summer, not now.
Yeah.
So it's like coming early in a way. It's it's it saddens me really. I mean, and I'm outside of this disaster. I can't imagine what it's like to actually be in it and to be freaking out. Because a lot of the time, I would say as well that if you don't have a family doctor or whatever, and something's wrong with you, you might end up having to go to the ER for something relatively minor. So theoretically, you might have to drive like 2 hours to Kamloops from somewhere like Lillooet for, not necessarily like emergency treatment, but something still quite urgent.
Yeah, so that was 120 closures last year in BC Interior ERs. That was double the number from 2023. We've tried to get some answers too because the BC NDP did do an advertising campaign in the UK to try to get some doctors. We don't know how successful that was. And then they're now trying to do a campaign in the United States, in Portland and in Oregon and Washington, that to try to get doctors and nurses to move away from the United States. And we were puzzled as to that because of that, like the 40% difference in our dollar even. And we tried to get numbers for how many new doctors and nurses were gained in the last little while. And they said they didn't have those numbers, but they did have the number for how many people have switched to the new family payment plan, which is odd that they didn't have those numbers. So we're going to try and do a freedom of information request and see if we can get some of that information. Again, reluctant to share that information.
Yeah, and reluctant to track their own projects, apparently. I mean, it almost seems like they just wanted to say that and then move on and not necessarily follow through.
They're spending our money and they're reluctant to share with what the results are when they do these campaigns. And then EB responds to Alaskan senators' threat to have cruise ships bypass BC ports. This is that, where David Eby said that he was going to charge trucks heading to Alaska. And then there's been a volley that's been sent back in this trade war where the Alaskan senator says that, cruise ships won't stop in BC ports, which is, like a good amount of money that's left behind there.
Yeah, but this guy is a Republican, isn't he? The governor of Alaska, and is playing very, very dumb because he's completely spineless and doesn't dare criticize Donald Trump, just like everybody else in the Republican Party, apparently, except for Rand Paul and one or two other sort of outsiders. But I mean, they're trying to ignore the actual origin of all this. No, the Republicans, sorry, they're trying to ignore the origin of all of this trouble, and it's almost like they're pretending that it's like David Eby is just completely at random just decided to like persecute Alaska and just totally ignored the fact that that guy's president in his party is the cause of this. But I mean, we have this conversation all the time, don't we? That the Republican Party is like, I've never seen it so subdued in my life. I mean, I struggle to think of a time even in history where it's been this spineless, this
And
crushed and subdued and
and it
slavish to the
and it
president.
doesn't help that the Democratic Party in the United States is in complete disarray, and it sounds like like they're really fractured now with Schumer then supporting that latest CR bill, and then like there's a bunch of people that have come out and said that they're no longer want to be part of the Democratic Party. They've basically given them like free reign because there is no
Yeah,
real
the Democrats
voice.
are trying to figure out what they are and who they are, aren't they? Like, as Gavin Newsom is trying to offer like some kind of a new perspective with his little podcast and trying to speak to people from who have different opinions, which is new for the Democrats. But and then on the other hand, you've got like the extremist wing of the party, people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, like they're pulling in a completely different direction. They want to double down on madness, basically. They need to figure it out, and it'll be very interesting actually to see who emerges as like the new leader or as the new group of leaders in the Democratic Party, because that's going to be all important
Uh, I think
for Canada, actually.
a lot of people, including like a Bill Maher, have said that the Democratic Party has been hijacked by the far left, and it's basically polarized so many people.
Yeah, I mean that's why they lost, I think, in the presidential election because they'd managed to alienate a lot of people. But worst of all, they looked, or at least to the people, they looked like they weren't credible on economics. And Donald Trump's only been in power for 2 months, but he already looks completely ridiculous in the world of economics. I mean, he doesn't look like he has a scrap of credibility. So if, as expected, he trashes the American economy with his trade wars and also destroys the Western alliance, which is separate from the economy but still important to Americans, I think he'll be, him and his party will be dragged down, and that gives the Democrats a chance to, offer an alternative. Whether they have the wherewithal to do that remains to be seen because they're not exactly overflowing with talent right now, are they, the Democrats?
Rents in Kelowna. Incentives right now, but rent's still fairly high. Kelowna is what, eighth most expensive in Canada? But lots of units. I think 2,000 more units are expected to flood the market this year, and the pressure is on to drop rents. So right now, the compromise is there's a lot of incentives, including like 2 months free rent if somebody signs a 14-month lease. Um, so I think right now, Kelowna has about 24,000 rental units, which is about a third of the total 75,000 homes in the city. Um, and they do expect rent to start to drop, right? Because the incentives probably won't cut it as we move into 2025. We're starting to see. Where I was driving around yesterday, there's so many buildings that look like that were purpose-built rentals, and that was one thing I would say the Liberals did really well was taking the GST off of purpose-built rentals, and it did encourage builders to build a lot of purpose-built rentals. But the home ownership part of that, the townhomes or the condos kind of dried up when they started doing that Airbnb regulation and all that, and forced people to kind of like not want to invest in buying properties. So the rental market has gone crazy. So they estimate that the vacancy rate here in Kelowna is actually around 6% as opposed to the official 3.8 that CM, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, came up with October of last year.
Well, I think, landlords probably aren't too delighted by this development, but in terms of the like productive part of the economy, it's obviously a massive advantage. It's very good news, isn't it, for especially for a city like Kelowna. I mean, the amount of times that I've interviewed, particularly people that work in the tech world, in the little tech sector there in Kelowna, like one of the main things that upsets them is that it's just not very competitive on rental costs. And you can see that even this list here. You look at Toronto there. See, for $380 more, you could live in Toronto and probably have like 3 or 4 times more in salary than you get in Kelowna. So obviously, it's like for Kelowna to succeed, and it isn't just Kelowna really. This applies to a lot of other cities, but for Kelowna to succeed, I think it sort of needs these low rents because it needs rents that are in tune with the salaries on offer, and that's how the economy will succeed ultimately.
And if you're looking for cheap rent in a city in Canada, Regina is calling you. 1240 uh, for the same type, and then Saskatoon at 1260, Edmonton at 1300, and Quebec City at 1390.
Wow,
So there you go.
Regina, very competitive, isn't it?
Yeah, versus
It's quite a nice
1930
place.
versus the 1930 here in Kelowna. So yeah, my daughter went to school out there for a while in Regina. It's a beautiful place. Definitely a cooler climate. Quebec City, a beautiful city as well.
Yeah, and that's very, very cold, very snowy.
And we talked about this, the population, Canada trying to grow, or the Liberals trying to grow Canada's population through immigration, and a lot of people choosing not to have babies. Look at Hungary, though. Hungary announces that mothers with one child will be exempt from paying income tax until they turn 30. And if you have two kids, no tax for life.
Yeah, they're taking it seriously. I mean, they're not the only place that does that. They also do it in France. Often, usually, like you'll see people, particularly of a left-wing persuasion, get very hot and bothered about this kind of thing. They really, really hate it, and they'll say like it's fascist or something like that, and they'll say, look, Hungary does it and Russia does it, like all these bad guys. But the French also do it,
Yeah,
and so
Quebec
do
does it.
our beloved companions in Korea. They do it too, because the Koreans have the worst birth rate on earth, the worst in the history of the world, basically. The Koreans are like they're taking the bullet train to extinction, basically. So they do it in Korea. I think they do it a little bit in Japan as well, but it never really took off in Japan. But Hungary, yeah, Hungary's like they take it quite seriously in Hungary, and it's apparently had a little bit of success. And
And
obviously the
it,
French, anyway, the French have been doing it for ages, and the French have a better birth rate than most other countries in Europe. So I mean, that suggests that it's doing some sort of good in France.
I think Quebec does it as well. Quebec offers incentives for children, right?
Quebec offers incentives of bloody everything, really. Just live there, and they'll throw money at you for all sorts of things. But
And you're
I think they
you're
do have something.
you're only a hop, skipping away. Maybe you bought your house in the wrong place.
I think so. Well, sometimes I think that, and then other times I think, do I want to be chased around by the French language police? And the answer is no, I don't. The answer is no.
No, there you go. You gotta display the sign. Japan pays around 15,000 yen per child per month. I was just pulling it up here on our friend ChatGPT. Hungary also gives one-time payments of $35,000 to families with four plus kids, and I think that one of the countries is offering free cars and stuff too.
Yeah, I mean, demographers, as they call themselves, people that are sort of focus on this sort of thing, they seem to think that it doesn't really work in the long term, that maybe it kind of gives you a little boost in the short term, but it doesn't actually fix the problem. But I don't really know. I mean, demography as a sort of subject is not really very well understood. I don't think it's not exactly a science, really. I mean, it uses scientific principles at times, but it's not science because obviously it's dealing with things that we can't possibly hope to understand, like why people choose to have kids or not. It's like it's very, very difficult to understand that, isn't it? But I mean, it, it, Japan is a weird one because Japan also has like relatively cheap property as well because so many people are dying out in Japan, and obviously they haven't gone gung ho on mass immigration. So property's kind of, and interest rates as well, we should say, are really low. So property's kind of like available in Japan, and that's considered to be one of the main reasons that, whenever you talk to somebody in Canada, you say like, "Why is the birth rate low?" They say, "Oh, nobody can buy a house." But they can in Japan, and they have an even lower birth rate there. So it's like so much of it doesn't make sense. Like there's so many like contradictions out there. And then there's Israel. Israel is like one of the hardest countries in the world to live in, not just because you might get, a missile fired at you or something like that. Your kids get conscripted into the military, but then the standard of living is kind of like low because most people find they have to move to Tel Aviv. It's absolutely impossible to live. It's so expensive. And yet Israel has a birth rate higher than higher than sort of third world countries. It has I think it's about three births per woman or something like that in Israel. It's just like, how is that possible? How do they do that? And nobody seems to understand.
Yeah, Hungary is listed as, and Hungary, France, and Sweden, and Norway are among the most family-friendly nations in terms of benefits. So Hungary definitely offering a lot of stuff up for people. And I have Hungarian roots. Maybe I should be moving back to Hungary. I think I'm past my childbearing years though, or
You should definitely get a passport if you haven't already got one, and then they might chuck you some perks,
well, maybe
and then you
we'll
could
get
pass
it.
it down as well. You could pass it down to your kids,
Maybe all Canadians will get an EU passport.
courtesy of Mark Carney, Irish Mark Carney.
That's a joke. Hopefully, that's a joke. Um, let's move on to markets here. Gold continuing to try to break that 3,000. It was over 3,000 for a bit this morning too, and it just pulled back a bit. Like I said, that $3,000 mark is going to be a challenge, right? Like it's that psychological barrier, but it's kind of like bopped over it a couple times there right now. So there you go. Gold. That's in U.S. dollars, right? In Canadian dollars. What is that in Canadian dollars? Like 50,000 or something like that? It's
It gets
actually
higher every minute, doesn't it?
it's actually 42.78 in Canadian dollars. Or I remember when I was buying gold as a youngster and it was at $200. A bit of a
Wow, good
difference.
time to have bought gold.
There you go. Bitcoin is bouncing around that $83,000 mark. The Bitcoin. Again, the markets are kind of like in a bit of, I think these the Trump trade war against the world really is causing a lot of market uncertainty. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just not great, not conducive to people wanting to invest anywhere for that matter, right? It's definitely causing a lot of uncertainty. Canadian dollar, looking for direction. So hasn't really reacted positively or negatively to Mark Carney being named as the Prime Minister. But retailer, Forever 21. I think you shop there, don't you, Ian? Forever 21?
Get my bras from there, but that's it.
Forever 21 filing for bankruptcy in the United States. They have about roughly 350 stores. And this is the second time they filed for bankruptcy too, right? So no word yet on what's happening with the Canadian stores so far, but they say the rise of e-commerce paired with slow death of American mega malls has been an ongoing headwind for Forever 21. It previously filed in for Chapter 11 in 2019, was bought out by bankruptcy. So by Authentic Brands Group, and they said that was probably likely their worst decision ever. But this is an ongoing trend in retailers, though, because we're seeing like largest retailers to close, and Kohl's, Macy's, J.C. Penney, and a couple other ones. But here in Canada, Hudson Bay as well, and I was in the Bay this weekend too, just to look around. Lots of stuff being marked down. And I heard some of the staff. You can pull up that next slide there. The Bay. Rommel, you want to put up that next one? There you go. I was in the Bay, and you can see a lot of stuff is marked down already. And I overheard one of the employees talking that they're not sure what's going on, when they're going to get like word to really liquidate things. I was in the Bay actually in Calgary and in the Kelowna Bay here. And lots of sales going on. A lot of stuff already picked through as well. So if you're looking for a deal, the Bay may be the place to do it.
It's kind of sad, isn't it, with Hudson's Bay though? It's like I've always had the impression that it's unloved. They don't seem like the people that operate it don't seem to love it. But they're always massive as well. It's always like huge amount of space. But it just seems like, you go into these things like that Forever 21. I've never actually been in there, but you go into that one like Aritzia, as I'm sure a lot of men have been dragged in there with female companions over the years. But you go into that sort of store, and it's like they really seem to they're trying, they really try. They're trying to sell you stuff.
Yeah, they
Whereas you go on the
merchandise.
Bay and it's just kind of like they don't seem to care at all. It's just like they let
Yeah.
you just wander around, and it's like it just doesn't seem like they're putting on much of a show. Like there's not that much effort really.
There used to be a difference, and including the Toronto Bay downtown Toronto used to really know how to merchandise, and it was kind of like almost like Canada's Macy's in the day. But yeah, it looks more like, Zellers was an arm of the Bay, and Zellers looked like almost like a flea market half the time. In the Bay recently started to look like more like that all the time. Whereas Aritzia definitely, they have a brand and image. When you walk into an Aritzia store, you kind of know that you're in a store that knows how to kind of like uh, market their wares, right? Same thing when you walk into Lululemon. Stuff is not all crowded in there. Whereas in the Bay, especially if you're walking there right now, it looks like, it's a fire sale in there.
Yeah, it's really it's very sad though. I would like to think it could survive. But it's interesting that Forever 21 thing there. I didn't realize this, but they said Brookfield Asset Management was involved in when they saved it from bankruptcy before. So maybe Mark Carney, with his knowledge of Brookfield, can come and somehow save Hudson's Bay.
And
But
we
I don't
talked
know. I hear he has another job now.
and we talked about the Garage brand and Dynamite. Remember we did that, and then that was the one that went public just recently. I think they went public around $20 a share. Currently trading at 13.32 a share. So that IPO not doing that well. It just basically fell off a cliff there. I won't be able to pull it up for you. Maybe we'll talk about it tomorrow. But Garage brand definitely having a tough time. Even Lululemon stock chart down lately. Like the Aritzia had been on a tear, and it recently has hit some headwinds as well.
Well, I suppose if you're uncertain about your economic future, the last thing you're probably going to buy is a pair of $100 tights or whatever, you know?
Fast fashion, eh?
Yeah.
I mean, Forever 21 was kind of a cheaper retailer, and there's so many like pop-up brands nowadays too. And the one thing that I'll add on the mall thing though is Hudson Bay is basically an anchor in almost every major Canadian mall. Think about that. It's a huge anchor. And when Sears was another one of those anchors, when Sears went out, right? Like in Kelowna here, that sat empty for a long time when because Sears had two locations. They had the Sears home store, and then the Sears, the retail store was kind of like the Bay. And Sears was kind of like the Bay was always seemed like it was an upscale Sears, and the Sears was kind of like a Zellers as well, right? So you can kind of just see them die off as their merchandising kind of looks older and older, and I think Sears really played to an older demographic that not a lot of stuff. My wife wouldn't even walk through Sears really. So, and then she loves the Bay, but so there you go. So if you don't stay up with it, I guess that's it. That's the end of it. It's sad for the Bay though.
I mean,
Bay's a story.
very sad.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go and buy one of those towels because it's quite a cool logo. I feel like they underplay how cool that logo is.
Yeah. Moving on to AI and tech. OpenAI hints at new secret writing model. Sam Altman said that he trained a new model that's good in creative writing. Not sure yet when it's going to get released. And they also say operators coming out too, right? Sam, he doesn't believe in writing or capitalization or punctuation or anything. You look at Sam's tweets there. He's going to rely on OpenAI to write his tweets, I think, in the future.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, the people who are probably most upset about this are the people that churn out like 10 or 20 novels a year for like usually written under a sort of pseudonym, or like ghostwriters as well, where they churn out these books. You do see them. There's like sections in bookshops where you'll see them. Like sometimes it's what would you call it? I don't even know what the genre is. Like romance novels, let's say, like women novels aimed at women, where it's like, I don't know, some sort of like lord. It's like basically just a sort of crap version of Pride and Prejudice. Like they churn out that stuff like mad, don't they? They just write sort of. There are people that it's their life is they just write these books, and westerns as well and things like that. And they don't put like a lot of love into it. It's just churned. So I feel like people like that, they might find themselves out of a job with this kind of thing.
Like I said, Sam Altman probably really wanting AI to take over his writing skills, because definitely he doesn't believe in capitalization when he starts off his tweets. But he's also
Well, I think he's being like, I think that there's an ostentatiousness attached to that. I think he's almost trying to like show off. It's like, I'm too cool and rich and busy to bother pressing the shift key to put to write in capitals.
Maybe somebody took the shift key away from him. There you go. But he's also come out and asked the Trump administration to protect AI companies from a wave of state regulations. So they want more of a federal mandate so that they don't want anything slowing them down, and they say that they have to worry about China. So I believe they're probably going to get that too, right? Because they're going to use China as the boogeyman and get all they need for these regulations. So a lot of people that saying we need to slow AI down, including the Europeans and Canadians, I don't think they're going to get slowed down in the U.S. though.
Yeah, because they take that rivalry seriously with China, don't they? Whereas Europe, they make the noises in Europe, don't they? But it just falls flat because the actions don't follow. The Europeans go on about how China is this great like rival to the West and all that, and then they continue having a military that consists of like five, you know, motorbikes or something like that. So they just don't take it seriously, but the Americans do, you know. They actually really believe it and they try and compete with China. So I think, yeah, as a consequence, if they want to compete on AI, they're gonna have to get on with it.
Tesla in the news for lots, mostly for negative reasons in the last little while. Like people are protesting Teslas, attacking Teslas. But here's something more positive. They're moving into China and sorry, India, and that's a large automobile market. That's the second largest population in the world. A lot of Teslas sold in China, and an Indian market would be huge for them. Like you said, we were talking about this prior. Like Tesla doesn't seem to take the Canadian market seriously because you can get Teslas a lot cheaper in the U.S., whereas there's not a lot of incentives offered here in Canada versus the U.S.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what their how they price themselves in India, because obviously it's a weird one, India, because they have a huge middle class and like they have some seriously wealthy people, like and quite a large number. But because it's such a huge country, you know, there are also many people that don't have much money at all. So I would be interested to see because didn't Elon Musk was going to do a really cheap car, wasn't he, at one point, and he just decided not
It's
to do it.
no, no, it's still coming out. It's supposed to come out here, I think, even this year. There's supposed to be a couple more models coming out. So I think a lot of the Tesla news is being uh, shadowed by all the negativity that's coming out with him running that Doge stuff. So I think that's what you hear most of the time now is all the stuff on Doge and that.
Well, maybe that's the plan then. Get that cheaper model there because you can get really much cheaper cars in India. Obviously, like Tata, they sell cars, don't they? Build cars are like very affordable. So I mean, they're gonna have to think hard about that.
And in our meme, as we close it off here, almost an hour. I'm on perfect, right? We're trying to do this in an hour. This is, I guess well, she was one of your favorite stars in Suits, right? You follow Meghan Markle quite well. She's got some UK heritage at being married to one of the princes, right?
I'm not so much interested in her acting career. I'm more interested in her philosophical treatises and her ideas about the world. I think she's one of the great minds of our age.
Is that you continuing the meme, I guess? Meghan Markle has a new show there. She's kind of doing like a Betty Crocker show that it's kind of had like a lukewarm reception, not doing really well. So the meme is dealing with her Netflix show's failure. That's her new Netflix show.
To be honest, like obviously she's you know she is what she is. She's a butt of a lot of jokes in many ways, but just look at it from another angle. Like she's been astonishingly successful with not necessarily all the cards, but she's found a way. It's like she keeps getting these deals for like tens of millions, hundreds of millions of
She's in.
dollars. It's like it's
She's
pretty
in the
astonishing.
news. She definitely people know who she is, right? And she sometimes
Yeah.
overshadows her partner.
Oh, I'd say that's been true for years now. Yeah, I'd say she's been the more famous of the two. Harry just, I don't really know what he thinks of life, to be honest. He doesn't seem to be that much of a happy camper, but
I
he
think
does appear in some of these
uh,
shows, doesn't he?
he's been asked to give up his life of pomp and promenade and to kind of like let Megan shine, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, must be hard living in a mansion in on the outskirts of Los Angeles and going skiing and whistling now and then.
And worried about getting picked up by ICE at any time.
Yeah, there's that as well. You got to be careful, Harry. And they're not. They're Trump isn't a fan, is he? He's actually said something. I think didn't somebody try
I
and
think he
get
said.
Trump to cancel his green card?
I think he said that he was going to leave him alone, because somebody was trying to like goad him into go and get him or something like that.
Yeah, that's not very Trump-like, is it? He doesn't like to. He doesn't like the high-profile things like that, attacking somebody high profile. I think he also really, when he says all the time about the Queen, the late Queen, that he loved her and all the rest of it, I think that is actually true. I think he really liked the Queen.
Yeah.
So he probably wouldn't want to do that to the Queen's grandson.
I really liked Meghan Markle in the Suits, though. I think she did a really good job in there. But I haven't watched her Netflix show.
You're not into a reality TV career.
No, I'm not into that stuff. So there you go. Um, that's our show for today. We do want to say Happy St. Patty's Day. I don't know if you're wearing a green. I put some green onto it. I think it's the only green shirt I have. But I don't know if
Doesn't look green on the screen, right?
it doesn't look green. It looks gray.
It looks gray.
It's definitely green. It's green, 100% green. I know like the color. Rommel does something with the color all the time, so there you go. It's the green screen. Oh, right. He had to make it different because of the green screen. Otherwise, I forgot about that. If I'm wearing green on a green screen, I'm going to be gone. So thank you, Rommel, for not making me disappear today. There you go. Not making me just a shirt. That's my mistake of the day. There you go. We do thank you for watching Kelowna Now. We ask that you subscribe, like, ring the bell, do all those things with YouTube. Follow us on X, on TikTok, or subscribe to our newsletter. That'd be great if you did that. And then visit the site, of course, KelownaNow.com. And hopefully one day, with this new change in government, we can have our Instagram and our Facebook back. If you're listening, Mark Carney, and we know that Chrystia Freeland listens, but Mark Carney, if you're listening, why don't we, while we're scrapping bills, why don't we scrap Bill C-18?
Yeah, that'd be nice. Send him a text, Christia, if you've still got his number.
Yeah, and then you can add that to your list of saying things that you're going to start listening to Canadians. You can listen to that one as well.
Brilliant, yeah.
We do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news,